The brave, rebellious and religious Muslim people of Aceh in the Indonesian island of Sumatra have always resisted foreign invasions. The Achenese people have a long history of resistance against foreign invasions. The Achenese people were known for their devotion to their religion and their skill in guerrilla warfare. For centuries, the Achenese people were ruled by their own independent state known as the Sultanate of Aceh. The Sultanate of Aceh had strong diplomatic ties with Muslim empires such as the Ottoman Caliphate and the Mughal Empire. These links were established because of Achenese religious scholars who traveled across the Islamic world in order to gain knowledge of Islam and to perform the Islamic pilgrimage of Hajj. The Islamic scholars of Aceh were highly respected across the Muslim world, especially by the Ottomans, who sent delegates and military advisors to Aceh in order to strengthen ties and help the Achenese people protect themselves against European invasions. Many European armies attempted to conquer the Sultanate of Aceh, but they all failed because of the bravery of the Achenese people and because of international Muslim support for the Achenese cause. In 1873, the Dutch Empire, who had already colonized most of Indochina, launched a full-scale invasion into the Sultanate of Aceh. The brave Achenese people defended their land and the Dutch were humiliated. Achenese resistance was fierce and the Dutch suffered extremely heavy losses. The invasion was met with endurance and strong resistance from the Achenese Islamic scholars who called on the people to wage a jihad against the Dutch. The Dutch invaders found themselves surrounded and attacked by Achenese snipers whom they could not see. After suffering heavy losses and after Achenese warriors had killed the Dutch general Johan Kohler, the Dutch retreated and withdrew from Aceh. After this humiliating defeat, the Dutch sent a second military expedition to Aceh in November 1873. This force was much larger and better equipped. However, the Dutch had made a terrible mistake and tried to conquer people that were impossible to conquer. The Aceh War was the longest and bloodiest war in Dutch history. In fact, it was the longest war fought by any European colonial army. This war against the brave people of Aceh lasted for more than 40 years. Shortly after the second Dutch invasion, Sultan of Aceh, Mahmud Siah, sent a delegation to Sultan Abdul Aziz in Istanbul, requesting the Ottoman Empire's protection and military aid against the Dutch military attacks. The Sultan agreed to help, and 8 Ottoman warships were dispatched to Aceh to protect it from the Dutch invasion. After the delegation returned to Aceh, this news of Ottoman support spread throughout Southeast Asia, encouraging Muslims in Southeast Asia to join the Holy War in Aceh. Thousands of Muslims traveled to Aceh to defend their fellow Muslims against the Dutch invasion. The Dutch found themselves overpowered by the brave spirit of the Achenese Muslim warriors. Achenese soldiers who were surrounded by the Dutch would never surrender. Instead, they would charge directly at the Dutch soldiers with short swords known as kwelangs, and would die as martyrs rather than surrender. Many Achenese warriors would also use suicide bombings and would attach themselves to mines. Achenese warriors would also wear parts of Quranic text and prayer books on their bodies in order to motivate them for jihad. The Dutch were losing huge amounts of men and resources and were on the brink of defeat. Victory for the Achenese seemed certain. However, the Ottoman ships that had been dispatched never arrived in Aceh, as they were diverted to Yemen in order to crush a rebellion against the Ottoman Caliphate. The strong Islamic unity that had existed for centuries was now crumbling. Lack of Ottoman support decreased the morale of many Achenese people and allowed the Dutch to obtain the upper hand. Despite the absence of the promised Ottoman support, the jihad continued, and the Achenese warriors inflicted huge losses on the Dutch. Many high-ranking Dutch generals were killed, and the Achenese warriors often used minarets of mosques as bases in order to snipe and kill Dutch soldiers from long ranges. The main leaders of the resistance were Islamic scholars such as Tengku Muhammad Saman, Tengku Sheikh Abdul Hamid Samalanga, and Tengku the Barat. After the Dutch realized the importance of religious leaders in the Achenese resistance, they began to burn down all of the mosques in the Sultanate of Aceh. Many mosques and religious schools were destroyed, and many important Islamic libraries were also destroyed, along with important Islamic books and manuscripts. After many of the male religious leaders were captured, many brave Achenese women continued the resistance against the Dutch. Women such as Kotnyak Den and Kotnyak Muta led guerrilla attacks against the Dutch forces and became highly feared by the Dutch. Resistance continued, and thousands of Dutch soldiers were killed. In addition, at least 4 Dutch generals were also killed by the brave Achenese warriors. However, by the year 1900, the Achenese resistance began to weaken due to a lack of external support from Muslim countries. In the year 1903, the Dutch captured and exiled Sultan Muhammad Daoud Siah. Therefore, the Dutch claimed to have won the war. However, continuous guerrilla warfare continued until 1942, when Aceh was liberated as a result of the Japanese invasion. The people of Aceh also fiercely resisted Japanese occupation and resisted the Indonesian state that came after it. The brave, spiritual, and religious people of Aceh have a distinct identity that is different from the rest of Indonesia. The rebellious legacy of the Aceh people lives on.